Don't make me feel ashamed of you. Mom. I felt something inside me snap, quietly, like a thread pulled too tight after years of holding everything together. He slid a stack of papers across the table, his voice cold, businesslike. $300,000. For his wife's debt. For his mistakes. For his pride. And I, Isabelline Crawford, unsigned. Not because I wanted to, but because after a lifetime of being told that love means sacrifice, I'd forgotten what it felt like to say no. When he walked out, he didn't look back. And in that moment, staring at his empty coffee cup, I realized my silence had raised the very thing that was destroying me. That was the morning I stopped being someone's mother and started becoming someone's truth. I used to believe that after Edward died, every storm in my life had passed with him. For 10 quiet years by the Santa Barbara coast, I learned to pour coffee slowly, to listen to the hum of the ocean like a widow's prayer. The house had grown used to my silence, until that morning broke it. Nathan walked in without knocking. The hinges creaked in protest as if even the door wasn't ready for him. He smelled of cologne and city ambition, crisp shirt tucked into tailored pants, the kind of appearance that said success before he even opened his mouth. "Morning, Mom," he said, not bothering to look at me. "We need to talk." I didn't ask what about. Instead, I did what I always did, poured a second cup, set it across from mine, and waited. It's strange how a lifetime of habit can feel like muscle memory, like you've been trained to serve before you even understand what's being asked of you. Nathan sat, laid a thick brown folder on the table, and spoke with the calm precision of a man closing a business deal. "It's Lydia's debt. $300,000. We need to clear it by Friday." I laughed quietly, thinking I must have misheard, but he slid the papers closer, his expression unflinching. $300,000, nearly everything I had saved after retirement. "Nathan," my voice broke before I could find the words. "I can't. You can," he interrupted, that old impatience flickering across his face. "You live in a paid-off house. You don't travel. You don't do anything." He leaned forward, his tone sharpening. "Don't make me feel ashamed of you." Something in me cracked, silently, invisibly, like a hairline fracture in porcelain. It wasn't the number that hurt. It was the familiarity of the tone, the echo of Edward's voice wrapped in my son's. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The kitchen blurred, the air grew thick with the smell of coffee and humiliation. I stared at the signature line. The pen trembled in my hand. Nathan watched me the way his father once did, patiently, certain of my compliance, and just like before. I signed. When he stood, he kissed my forehead absently, already scrolling through his phone, and walked out with the confidence of a man who believed love was synonymous with obedience. The door closed. The only sound left was the faint clink of the teaspoon against the saucer as I reached for my untouched coffee. That's when I saw it, the invoice he'd left behind, corner tucked under the folder. My eyes scanned the printed line, and my breath caught. The name listed wasn't Lydia Crawford, it was Nathan E. Crawford. My hand tightened around the cup. The porcelain felt too thin, too fragile, just like the piece I'd been mistaking for safety all these years. Outside, the waves struck the rocks with sudden force, as if the ocean itself had something to say. For the first time in a decade, I didn't find comfort in the sound. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty chair across from me. The coffee had gone cold, but I kept holding it, as if warmth could still be coaxed back into something that had already died. And deep down, beneath the silence and the salt in the air, I knew. Something in me had broken beyond repair, and maybe, just maybe, it was finally time for it to... The night after Nathan left, I sat staring at the stack of papers he'd shoved across my table, unable to make sense of the numbers or the signatures. The silence in the house was heavy, like the quiet after an argument that never really ends. I reached for my phone before I could talk myself out of it and dialed the only person who'd ever known how to speak to me in straight lines. Marjorie. I need help. On the other end, I could hear her steady exhale, that familiar pause before she delivered something sharp and true. You designed beautiful spaces. Isa. Too bad you never designed your own boundaries. Her tone wasn't cruel. It was factual. The way lawyers cut through illusions. When I explained what had happened, she didn't ask for details. She just sighed. Bring me everything you've got. I'll drive up tomorrow. By morning, the dining table was buried under folders and dusty envelopes, papers that hadn't seen light since Edward's funeral. The smell of old ink mixed with salt air coming through the open window, and for a moment, it felt like I was sitting at the crime scene of my own life. Marjorie arrived right on time, hair tied back, reading glasses perched low on her nose. She flipped through each document with a precision I'd long forgotten how to have. Then her fingers stopped mid-turn. You signed a financial power of attorney 3 years ago. I blinked. What does that mean? She glanced up, expression grave. It means Nathan has full control over your assets, every single one. The words hit harder than I expected. My hands went cold around the coffee cup. I remembered that winter, Nathan handing me a stack of forms beside the Christmas tree, saying it was just to simplify the banking. I'd been distracted by lights, carols, the quiet ache of missing Edward. So I did what I always did. I signed. Marjorie placed the document flat on the table and tapped her pen on the letterhead. Crawford Holdings, LLC, she read aloud. That's his shell company. Isa, he owns the house. For a second, everything in the room blurred. The sunlight streaming through the window landed on the family portrait above the mantel. Crawford Interiors, a family vision, Edward, Nathan, and me. 2 confident smiles and 1 polite one. I looked at my younger self in that photo, tilted head, hands clasped, almost stepping out of the frame. I had been standing on the outside the whole time and never noticed. Marjorie's voice broke the silence. He's not protecting you. He's repeating his father's playbook. The words stayed with me long after she left. As the tide crashed outside, I could still hear them echoing in the house that, apparently, was no longer mine. That night, I couldn't sleep. I opened my old email account, one I hadn't touched since Edward's death, and there it was, an archived message from 15 years ago. Don't worry about the paperwork, I'll handle it. Just trust me. That phrase, just trust me, had been the lullaby of my marriage, the rhythm of control disguised as love. Edward had died, but the echo of him lived on in our son's voice. I remembered Nathan as a boy, small and furious after being scolded, hiding behind his father. Edward would rest a hand on his shoulder and tell me, "Don't talk back to your father." Now, decades later, my son used the same tone, the same words, only this time, I was the one being told not to speak. I brewed coffee, the bitter scent filling the kitchen like an accusation. The steam rose and twisted in the air as if it were trying to spell out what I refused to admit, that I had been complicit in my own silencing. When the phone rang, Marjorie's voice came through low and certain. "If you keep playing the mother, Isa, you'll never learn to be yourself." Her words settled in me like stones at the bottom of a lake. I walked to the window. Outside, the ocean gleamed silver under the moonlight, each wave folding into another like a stack of unsigned contracts. Every one of them looked harmless until you read the fine print, and in that stillness, a thought surfaced, quiet but sharp. Stop trusting. Start acting. I went to my desk, turned on the laptop, and opened my bank account. At first, everything looked normal, but when I clicked through the transfer history, my stomach dropped. There were multiple transactions, large sums wired to unfamiliar companies, each signed off with my electronic authorization, my name, my signature, perfectly replicated, except it wasn't mine. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the surf outside. I zoomed in on the screen, staring at the neat cursive loop of an imitation that had stolen more than my money. It had taken my voice. In that moment, I understood the truth I'd been avoiding. Nathan's debt wasn't just financial, it was moral. He had inherited his father's empire of control and simply built another wing. And I was still the foundation it stood on. For a week, I ignored every call that came through. But right at 7 on Monday morning, the doorbell rang. 3 sharp, hurried chimes, the exact rhythm Nathan used when he was a boy coming home late. I didn't even have to check the peephole. I already knew. He stood on the porch, tense, holding his phone in one hand like it was an extension of his anger. "Mom," he said, his voice clipped. "We need to talk again." I let him in and started the coffee maker out of habit, the hiss and drip filling the silence that stretched between us. The morning light slanted across the kitchen, glinting off the framed family vision portrait still hanging on the wall. The same portrait that once meant pride now looked like mockery. Nathan didn't sit. He dropped into the chair like a man ready for battle. "Lydia's in trouble," he began. "We need another 200,000. I froze. 200? Nathan, it's urgent. You don't understand how dangerous this is." His eyes burned with something that wasn't fear. It was control, cold and calculated. "What happened to the 300,000? I asked. "I paid off her investors," he said quickly. "But she's involved with the wrong people. Mom, I'm fixing it." He said, not we. That one word told me everything. "I can't give you more money. Nathan," he pushed away from the table, voice rising. "You can't or you won't, because there's a difference." I held my ground, the hot mug steady in my hands. For a second, I saw him at 6 years old, cheeks flushed from fever, reaching for me in the dark. And then I saw the man in front of me, eyes hard, seeing me not as a mother, but as a means. "Nathan," I said quietly, "I've spent my life fixing men's messes. I'm done." The air thickened. He stared at me as if I'd betrayed something sacred. "You've lived off Dad's work your whole life," he said, voice sharp and low. "If it weren't for me, you'd be nothing. I'm the reason you even have this house." He stormed out before I could respond. The door slammed, echoing through the hall. The porcelain cup slipped in my hand, cracked against the counter. A thin line of blood traced down my finger. That night, my phone buzzed, a message from Lydia. "They're threatening him. Isabelline, please. He'll be killed if we don't pay." I read it again and again, torn between instinct and exhaustion. Help him. Don't fall for it. I called Marjorie. He's desperate. "Marge, Lydia says he's in danger." "Isa," she said calmly. "He's always in danger when he needs something." Minutes later, she texted me a link to a local news article. Crawford Holdings under investigation for false crypto investments. And there was Nathan, smiling, arm wrapped around Lydia. The so-called threats were nothing but smoke to hide the fire he'd started himself. I finally understood. He didn't need rescue. He needed consequences. That night, I couldn't sleep. I opened my laptop and scrolled through old emails, Edward's clipped instructions, Nathan's requests, my own notes written in shaky calm. Every sentence began the same way. He needs me. But the truth pressed in. I was no longer a mother. I was a safety net, a wallet, a shield. At sunrise, Marjorie called. "Isa, listen, there's something you need to know. The FBI's contacting you." "What? Why?" "There are loan accounts opened under your name, hundreds of thousands." I sank into the chair, the world narrowing to the sound of my own breathing. "He forged your electronic signature," she continued. "You're listed as a shareholder. If you don't come clean, they might think you're involved." Outside, waves crashed against the rocks, hard and rhythmic, like a gavel striking wood. Marjorie's voice softened. "He's not just using your money anymore. Isa, he's using your name. That's your identity. That's everything." Later that evening, the phone rang again. Nathan's number. I hesitated before answering. "Mom," he said softly, almost gentle. "I know things are crazy. I just need you to trust me. Just one last time. Trust me." The same phrase Edward had used every time he cornered me into silence. A chill slid down my spine. "I did trust you," I said. "For 40 years, I trusted men who told me to. So you're just going to let your son go to prison? If that's what it takes for both of us to finally be free," I said, "then yes." The line went dead. I walked to the window. The sea stretched endless and black under the moonlight. Once, Nathan had asked me, "Mom, why do waves always come back?" And I'd told him, "Because they don't know how to leave." Now, standing there with the wind clawing at the glass, I understood. It was time to be the wave that learned how to go. The next morning, an email arrived from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Financial Crimes Division. "Mrs. Isabelline Crawford, we have reason to believe you are a key witness or participant in an ongoing fraud investigation involving your son." And just like that, I wasn't a worried mother anymore. I was a suspect. But somehow, that realization felt like the first real step out of hell. I left Santa Barbara at midnight. The old Volvo groaned as it rolled down Highway 101, its headlights cutting thin lines through the fog. Streetlights flickered over the windshield, washing the glass in gold and shadow, like old memories flashing by too quickly to grasp. In the passenger seat sat a small suitcase with a few folded clothes, my banking records, a worn notebook, and the silver pine leaf brooch Marjorie had given me years ago. "Freedom is expensive," she once said, "but servitude costs your soul." For the first time in my life, I decided to pay the higher price. The radio murmured a weather alert. A storm is forming along the California coast. I smiled bitterly. The storm was late, but right on time. I drove 6 straight hours north, stopping only at a gas station near Redding. The air was cold, the parking lot half empty. When I came out of the restroom, I saw it, an old black SUV idling a few spaces away. Dark windows. No license plate light. A chill crept down my spine. In the restroom mirror, I caught a glimpse of a man stepping out of the SUV, his jacket collar raised, eyes following me as I walked back to my car. I pretended not to notice, paid for my gas, and pulled out onto the road without looking back. Then, just before dawn, I veered north toward Oregon. When I crossed the state line, rain began to fall. Soft at first, then heavy, drumming on the windshield like a cleansing. Each drop washed away a little more of the fear that had been clinging to me for years. Ashland was small and quiet, tucked between forests and misty hills. I rented a small apartment above a florist shop, the kind of place where even silence had weight. The walls creaked softly, The air smelled of pine and rain. I opened my laptop and logged into my account. My balance was small, but enough to begin again. For a fleeting second, I felt something like relief until I checked the authorized access list. There it was, Crawford Trust, managed by Nathan E. Crawford. He still had control, even from miles away. He could reach in and take whatever was left. I called Marjorie immediately. He's still in my accounts. Then we freeze them, she said firmly. Tomorrow morning, call the federal office in Portland. When the call ended, I sat alone at the wooden table, staring at the half-unpacked suitcase. The room felt too clean, too temporary, like a life waiting to be decided. I placed the silver brooch beside my notebook, a small, shining reminder that I still existed. That night, under the whisper of rain against the window, I wrote in my notebook, "Tonight I left California. Maybe I left motherhood too." The next morning, the phone rang before sunrise. Marjorie's voice was tight. "Isa, FBI found something. It's bad." My knees went weak. "Tell me." "Nathan used your name for his shell companies. They're laundering crypto money from overseas investors. You're listed as a majority shareholder." The world tilted. I wasn't just the mother of a fraudster. I was now part of the crime. On paper, at least. "They need you to testify, Isa, or they'll think you were involved." "Testify? Against my son?" "Against the crime," Marjorie said quietly. "The rest will decide itself." By afternoon, a call came from an unfamiliar number. "Mrs. Crawford, this is Special Agent Rivera, Financial Crimes Division. We'd like to ask a few questions about your connection to Crawford Holdings." My voice steadied on instinct. "I wasn't involved," I said. "I was erased." There was silence on the line. Then softly, "Then help us prove that." Marjorie arrived in Ashland the next day, rain still clinging to her coat. She spread documents across my kitchen table, bank statements, old contracts, and a faded photocopy of the power of attorney I had signed years ago. "This is our shield," she said. "You signed under manipulation. That matters." We turned the files over to Agent Rivera. He skimmed each page, stopping at the end. "If you cooperate, Mrs. Crawford, we can protect you." I frowned. "Protect me from what?" "From your son's creditors," he replied. "We believe they might come after you." My chest tightened. The man from the black SUV flashed in my mind. He hadn't been watching out of curiosity. He'd been waiting. That night, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat by the window, the forest outside swallowed in mist, the rain whispering secrets I'd spent a lifetime avoiding. "If I stay silent now," I murmured, "I'll lose myself again. And this time, I won't get another chance." I picked up the phone and dialed Rivera's number. "Agent," I said, my voice steady. "I'll testify, whatever you need." He paused, then replied, "That's the right choice. Mrs. Crawford, it's time someone told the truth." When I hung up, I didn't cry. Instead, a quiet relief filled my chest, not the kind that comes from safety, but from finally saying yes to myself. Los Angeles. The courtroom felt as cold as a surgical room, white lights, marble floors, silence sharp enough to cut. I sat in the witness chair, hands clasped tightly, feeling my pulse match the echo of the judge's gavel. Nathan entered in a gray suit, his hair perfectly combed, his collar slightly creased. When his eyes met mine, I saw something raw behind the anger, a flicker of fear. For the first time, he looked at me as someone he couldn't command. The prosecutor began, projecting evidence onto the screen, bank transfers, shell companies, forged signatures. "Miss Crawford," he asked, "did you authorize these transactions?" I drew a breath, my voice calm though my heart trembled. "No." I authorized his birth. Everything else, he took. A hush swept through the room. I heard pens pause, the scrape of chairs. I didn't look at Nathan, but I could feel him freeze. Then came the defense. Mrs. Crawford, the lawyer said gently, "Do you love your son?" "Yes," I answered, a small, bitter smile forming. "That's why I'm here, because love shouldn't mean blindness." He pressed on. "Do you still see yourself as his mother?" "Yes," I said. "But being someone's mother doesn't mean being their hostage." Each word loosened something inside me. Chains I hadn't realized were still wrapped around my throat. Then Lydia was called to the stand. Her hands shook, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "I helped Nathan forge the first contract," she confessed. "I thought it was temporary. He said he'd fix it." The courtroom erupted. Nathan turned toward her, face drained of color. I looked at her and saw the girl I used to be, obedient, hopeful, blind. When the verdict came, it was final. 11 years in prison. No parole. As they cuffed him, Nathan looked at me, eyes dark, trembling with fury. "You'll regret this," he hissed. I met his gaze, my voice steady. "No, son, for the first time, I won't." I returned to Ashland. By late autumn, the pine trees outside my window had shed their needles, layering the ground in bronze and gold. The air carried that damp sweetness of earth after rain, the smell of endings, and of something clean beginning underneath. A month had passed since the trial when the letter arrived. The paper was yellowed, folded unevenly, the handwriting jagged as if written in a rush. "You were right to leave. I would have destroyed you. Nathan." I read it twice, slowly, tracing the grooves of each word. Then I folded it carefully and set it under the small cactus on my table. The plant I'd chosen because it knew how to survive without being watered. I didn't cry, not because I felt nothing, but because the tears had finally served their purpose. A few days later, there was a knock on the door. Lydia stood there, bundled in a beige coat, her belly softly rounded beneath the fabric. Her smile was small, almost apologetic, and her hands trembled as she clasped them together. "He said you were cruel," she whispered, "but I think you were brave." For a long moment, I just looked at her, the woman who had once mirrored my own blindness. There was no anger left, only recognition. "Don't repeat my silence," I told her. Her eyes glistened. "I won't. I want to raise my baby differently." When she turned to leave, she hesitated, reaching into her bag. "Before I forget," she said, handing me a sealed envelope. "The FBI returned this. They said it was seized from Nathan's account. Inside were the property deeds for the Santa Barbara house, now in my name again." I stared at the papers for a moment, then smiled. "I don't think I'll need it anymore," I said softly. After she left, I made a fresh pot of coffee. The rich aroma filled the apartment, mingling with the golden light spilling through the window. I stood there, cup in hand, watching the last slant of daylight stretch across the floor, and for the first time in years, I felt light. Not the hollow kind that comes from escape, but the steady kind that comes from truth. The trial hadn't just sentenced Nathan. It had buried the version of me who lived her life apologizing for existing. Now, all that remained was the woman who had finally learned to live without permission. A year later, the snow in Ashland fell like sifted flour, soft and soundless, coating the streets in quiet grace. By then, the ghosts of Santa Barbara had faded into something distant, almost tender, like a scar you can touch without flinching. I had opened a small studio downtown, tucked between a bakery and a bookstore. The hand-painted sign above the door read, "Crawford Studio, Redesign your space. Redesign your life. Inside, the walls were white. Sunlight spilled through the big front windows, and the smell of paint mixed with coffee. Every corner held a softness I never allowed myself before. Plants that didn't need much care, shelves lined with secondhand brushes, and a small speaker humming quiet jazz. Most of my students were women around my age, retired teachers, widows, grandmothers, each one trying to find a reason to start again. We didn't talk about the past. We talked about colors, about light, about how a space could hold pain and healing at the same time. I taught them how to strip a room down to its bones, to choose calm over clutter, to say no without apology. One afternoon, as I was repainting a cabinet door, a student asked, "Why do you paint everything white? Ms. Crawford?" I paused, the brush resting against my palm, and smiled, because it reminds me of breathing again. White, the color that once felt empty, had become the color of space, of freedom, of forgiveness. It wasn't absence anymore. It was possibility. That evening, as I locked up, I found an envelope slipped under the studio door. No return address, no stamp, just my name written in familiar handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper, white, clean, one line of ink, steady and careful. "Thank you for letting me fall." No signature. But I didn't need one. I sat there for a while, holding the letter between my fingers. I could almost see him, Nathan, writing it in some quiet corner of a prison cell, finally understanding the gravity of his choices. I folded the paper neatly and placed it in the drawer beside my coffee pot at home, not close to my heart, not thrown away, just there. Proof that some things have to collapse completely before they can be rebuilt. That night, the first snow of the season began to fall. I brewed a fresh cup of coffee and stepped out onto the porch. The flakes melted as they touched my skin, disappearing almost instantly, yet leaving behind a trace of cool life. I closed my eyes and listened to the wind threading through the pines, to the soft hum of the town below, to the pulse of my own steady breath. And I whispered. I didn't just leave. I finally arrived. The words didn't feel like a declaration. They felt like a homecoming. The next morning, sunlight poured through the studio windows, warm against the clean white walls. The women gathered, chatting softly, laughter weaving into the rhythm of the day. I sat at the front table, the same seat I'd once taken for granted in another life, the kitchen table in Santa Barbara, where Nathan had stood towering over me, demanding, accusing. Only now, I was the one in control of the space. The twist struck me gently, like a realization rather than a shock. I was sitting in his place, the same seat where power used to live. But now, that power was mine. Quiet, kind, unshakable. No voices ordering, no eyes judging, no hands reaching to take. Just me, Isabelline Crawford, 67 years old, breathing in the morning light, finally understanding what freedom truly felt like. And for the first time in my life, I didn't owe that feeling to anyone.